Hello, FreightWaves friends and fans, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Tuesday edition of FreightWaves Now. We are coming live to you right now, my favorite time of the day at 4 o'clock. Here to talk, we've got two chiefs in the kitchen today. Chief Meteorologist Nick Austin telling us what in the world is happening with the flooding in the Midwest, and Chief Economist Ibrahiim talking to us about housing starts. We got some new data on that, and how does the hip bone connect to the thigh bone, and what's the relationship to this and the greater freight economy? So welcome to Chattanooga, where it is beautiful here today, and we're going to talk about, though, disruptions where it is not as happy of a picture, but you love it, right, Nick?
Well, I mean, it does give us something to talk about, but it's still bad news for folks in the Midwest. But before we talk about the nation's heartland, I want to talk about something that's going to be happening out west later today, and especially tonight, that folks on the road will need to know about, and all those drivers out there. Another big snowstorm coming to the Sierra Nevada.
I knew it! We can't get
I was going to ask you to
wing.
guess. I figured you'd be able to guess. But,
yeah, I would have.
It's actually been kind of quiet out there for a little while, but yes, they have already had a little bit of snow this week. And I say a little bit compared to most storms that they've had this winter, but this year, especially back in February. But a much stronger Pacific storm is going to be heading towards the west coast tonight. So we're talking about from tonight through the day on Wednesday, at least a couple of feet of snow, maybe even more for some of the highest peaks and along the ridges in the Sierra Nevada. A lot of strong winds. So
Donner Pass?
Donner Pass. All of the usual
Suspects.
Typical problem spots as far as going over the mountain passes on I-80 and a lot of the other typical roads through the mountains, yes. Probably major delays, possibly even closures. So have to just be aware of that. And that storm should kind of fade out by tomorrow night. But I just wanted to mention that because that's going to be kicking in later today and tonight. Now, off to the Midwest, not much happening as far as actual rain and snowfall today, but there's still a lot of flooding in parts of the Midwest right along the Missouri River, going through Omaha, right on that border between Nebraska and Iowa. There's also flooding some areas upstream and downstream, but it's still the worst spots are right there in the Omaha area and over into Iowa. So it's going to stay pretty quiet as far as the weather, but there's still the potential for water levels remaining high in a lot of areas along the Missouri, even through the rest of this week. The spring outlook overall from NOAA and the National Weather Service saying that probably above average precipitation for that region through May and in the spring.
Yep.
Which means there could be potentially more flooding down the road with heavy thunderstorms and a lot of periods of heavy rain. So we'll see. Hopefully that won't come true, but that's what they're saying right now. But we'll take a look at a couple of, this is a great new feature on Sonar. We have the live Department of Transportation cameras from the different states. So if we go here to Grand Island, Nebraska, which is this area is here right along Interstate 80, and we're going to try and pull that up, still showing that there's some flooding right near the interstate there. This is exit 312.
What is happening right now?
It's happening right now, right off I-80, Grand Island, and then right smack in Omaha, right in the city of Omaha.
Omaha, somewhere in middle America.
You can see there's still some more flooding off to the sides of the highway there. This is 31st Street, North Omaha, right off the interstate as well. Probably not far from I-29 and I-80 where they come together, so right along I-680. So there's still flooding there. It's not as bad as it was last week. That's the good news. The water has been going down and receding in many spots, but it's still at flood levels, at least minor flood levels, at a lot of gauges along the Missouri River, from South Dakota all the way down to near St. Joseph in Missouri. So still going to be a problem this week. We're going to pull up a quick sonar chart here to kind of show what's going on because of the ongoing problems with this flooding.
So Nick, you've pulled up tender lead time here in Omaha, and you've cross-compared it with the outbound tender volume index. What's going on here?
Right, so the orange line, which is the outbound tender volume index, this is over, say, about the past 12 or 13 days, since right after the flooding started. The flooding started right around the 16th. So if you notice since then, the volume is going way, way down.
Volume's going down
out of Omaha. So with roads and washed out, with bridges washed out, just transportation overall having a tough time with trucks getting in and out. Also, some factories closed. People who work at these places not even able to get to work in a lot of instances because their neighborhoods have been flooded out and they're displaced. So we see the overall volumes just going down out of Omaha. So dropping since the 12th or 13th, dropping about 15% or so, which is pretty significant. And at the same time, you notice the green line on here, that's the tender lead time, right? Which is the time between when the load is tendered on the market to when it's picked up. So with it increasing, I mean, now it's up to almost 3 days, okay? Rising from about 2 3/4 days to almost 3 days as far as tender lead time, which indicates tighter constraint, fewer trucks available. So the shippers are trying to give carriers more time and extend those lead times out. So that's what's happening as the flooding is ongoing and continuing in a lot of areas along the Missouri River, including Omaha, through the rest of the week. So it's possible that maybe the lead times will be extended out even a little more. Volume might even continue to drop a bit until the waters continue to recede and they start to continue to do more road repairs, more bridge repairs, more railroad repairs too. So it's possible that the volumes might drop more, tender lead times might increase even a little more before things start to kind of get back to normal. And I use normal in quotes.
Thank you, Chief Meteorologist Nick Austin. You know, the weather in January, I was just talking to a rail expert on Saturday, and you know, rail operations were not so bad in January, but then when the weather hit in February, it hit with a vengeance, and it doesn't seem to have let up. For instance, we had all the snow in the western area. Now we're having all of the disruptive flooding in the Midwest that is really interrupting rail conditions. The disruptions are real. And I'm curious too, because I'm about to ask Ibrahiim beyond this. We had January was bouncing back a little bit with housing starts during this mild weather pattern. And boy, has it come back with a vengeance, the weather that is. How has that impacted things? Let's find out. Welcome, Ibrahiim.
How's everything going, Chad? Always
fantastic.
Glad to be here. Yeah, so you know, when I come here, I usually like to touch on different things that I think affect freight demand. I think the last time I was here, I talked a little bit about exports, and before then, I've talked about manufacturing and other things. Yeah. And so today, I wanted to talk a bit about housing and construction because there was a pretty important housing release that came out earlier this morning, which was new housing starts, right? Yeah. And one of the things I wanted to point out is that really, when you look at like the trend in housing starts, I think in the early parts of last year, there was a real acceleration in home building. And I think most people thought that this was going to kind of continue on and you would gradually see like this resurgence in construction activity. But really in the middle part of last year, like around the third quarter and the fourth quarter of last year, you saw housing starts just take a nosedive and continue down that path. And you mentioned earlier that January's data at the beginning of this year was actually pretty positive, and you can see in the blue line here the big spike up in January. But then February's numbers came out this morning and right back down, right? And so housing just can't seem to get out of this funk that it's in. You can see the red line here, which is like a moving average. The month-to-month movements in housing starts can be pretty volatile. And so I like to look at the moving average just to get a feel for what the trend is doing. You can see the trend pick up and this gradual downward slope in the red line in the second half of 2018 through the early parts of 2019. Okay. And it's one of the real concerns, especially for certain types of freight. So I mean, when you think about like flatbed carriers, for example, a lot of what they move are these construction materials. And so if housing starts aren't doing well, flatbed demand isn't going to do well either. And so this is putting some downward pressure on that part of the freight market. Now, again, you know, you mentioned that part of this might be due to the weather.
Yeah, I was just curious.
I mean, well, February's weather definitely wasn't favorable, especially the earlier parts of this month. Like late January, early February, I think most of the middle part of the country was hit pretty hard by inclement weather, either just really abnormal cold or snowstorms, and both of those aren't good for housing starts for sure. But one of the things that you notice when you look at the details of this morning's report is that housing starts fell in every region in the country. So like it wasn't concentrated to just like the Midwest, for example. It fell in the Northeast, it fell in the Southeast, it fell in the Midwest, and it also fell in the West regions, which suggests that there might be something broader going on that's just keeping housing starts down. Now, housing starts in general, like they have a bunch of longer term kind of constraints. Like there's some fundamental things that are going wrong within housing that's causing some of this decline. For one, they're having a hard time finding qualified workers, which I think is a problem that's emerging in a lot of areas in the economy right now, that finding just like good qualified construction workers is a challenge. Okay. The other part of it is they're having a hard time finding lots that they can build on, that there's a shortage of like developed lots that home builders can build on, and so that's putting some downward pressure on there. And housing has just been hit by like one weather event after another since like the third quarter of last year. I mean, if you think back to like last August and September during hurricane season, there were a couple major hurricanes that hit. After the hurricane season was over, there were wildfires in California, which weigh down on housing starts. And then you get into the winter months where you're worried about, how cold is it going to be, whether or not there's going to be snowstorms. What that generally means is that there should be some pent-up demand down the road somewhere. Like if you believe this idea that like weather events are derailing activity that otherwise would take place, then once you get to like warmer, more normal months, March, April, June, July, you should see a bit of a bounce back in housing activity. But the one thing what I would say is that I think it definitely looks a lot weaker than what we would have thought, say, 12 months ago. And I think that sector looks considerably weaker than what it would have looked like a year ago.
For sure that. I'm even just thinking about last month and the way that you felt somewhat a little more positive. Maybe, hey, not so fast. Maybe the economy's not slowing down as much as, is like being widely publicized in the media. And you were like, this is a fundamental indicator, and hey, it's ticking back up. But now this disappointing news is somewhat troubling.
Well, yeah, I mean, and in general, I'm a lot more concerned about the state of the freight economy than I am about the overall economy. And I think I talked about this the last time I was here, that the things that tie directly to freight movements, the goods side of the economy, those indicators are doing far worse, I think, than what like the overall economy is doing. So there's areas of the economy that cover service activity, which seem to be doing pretty well, but that doesn't necessarily translate to freight movements. And the things that I focus on for freight are things like manufacturing, construction, retail, and all of those are kind of trending downward, which isn't a good sign.
Well, and you also wanted to talk about retail and how that applies to, the freight economy.
Well, right. And so most people, they think about housing and the impact of what that does to freight, and they make sort of the direct leap and say, well, housing's not doing well, so this means flatbed carrier demand is going to be going down, right? And that's true, but there are some secondary effects that are connected to housing, that when people build new houses and they sell new houses and there's housing activity, it leads to purchases down the road. I mean, if you think about like the last time you bought a new house, most of the time people will buy new furniture to go along with it, they'll buy new appliances, you might find remodeling activity that goes on after a home is bought. And so when the housing market's doing poorly, other areas in the economy also suffer as well. And so here I pulled a sonar chart here, which is retail sales growth for furniture and related products, right? And so I just want to track to see like what this weakness in housing is doing to furniture sales. And this is year over year growth in furniture and housing.
It goes all the way back to 2014.
Yeah, so this is a 5-year history.
Yeah.
And you can see generally pretty good growth here, but once you get towards the latter part of 2018, the early parts of 2019, sales are negative year over year, right? And so housing activity is dying down in the economy. It's having this kind of ripple effect into the retail side. And so it's not just the flatbed carriers that are going to feel the effects of like a weak housing market. It has downstream effects also. And you can pull up similar charts for things like appliance sales and things like that. And they all follow this similar kind of pattern, which just says that, and I think all of this is really just connected to the softness that we're seeing in housing.
Okay. Well, thank you for that overview, even though it's bad news. But sometimes bad news is the news that we need, and so we are bringing it to you live what is happening right now each and every day on FreightWaves Now. We come out at 4 o'clock each business day, and it's an exciting week for us. We're celebrating the launch on Friday of the freight futures market. So stay tuned to what is happening here each and every day. Check us out on Twitter, social media, share the love. If you're cool and hip, you could be on Instagram. Maybe you're just, more of a seasoned pro and you're on LinkedIn. Whatever the case, thanks for sharing the love, and we will see you on FreightWaves.com and elsewhere. And in the meantime, don't worry, be happy.